So today I'm going to speak on the borderline cornea and when to proceed. Just a moment. So corneal ectasia is a life-threatening complication of keratorefractive surgery, which is characterized by progressive steepening and thinning of the cornea, okay, which leads to irregular astigmatism, loss of best corrected visual acuity. It can present days to years after the procedure, and the prevalence is theoretically low, estimated between 0.04 to 0.6%. So are we underestimating the number or are we understating the numbers? So we don't have the answer for this right now. Clinical significance is it's very important because this condition is preventable and most LASIK patients are young adults in whom the burden of condition is greater. Still question abound, what is borderline cornea? How thin is too thin? How thick should the cornea be to maintain the structural integrity? And how deep can the surgeon go? If we have answer for all these questions, then why do some patients with abnormal topographies not develop ectasia following keratorefractive surgery, while some patients with normal looking eyes do? So are thin cornea an independent risk factor for post-LASIK ectasia? The answer is probably no, because corneal thickness alone is not a measure of cornea's inherent structural stability. Crosslink corneas are stronger, stiffer, more compact, but they are thinner. And keratoconus can be seen in the eyes with the thick corneas. So all our questions are not answered yet. Red flags are not only the thickness of the cornea, but the shape and size of the cornea, which can be assessed by the curvature and the diameter. Pachymetry, of course, is a risk factor. Comorbidities like autoimmune disorders, and the scarred cornea, for example, post-surgery or post-infections. So as Dr. Raghav already covered this, I would like to enhance the point that analysis of intrinsic biochemical properties and alterable biochemical properties are very important. And intrinsic biochemical properties can be assessed from corneal topography, age, and the alterable biochemical properties can be assessed from percentage tissue altered and residual stromal bed. And these factors, along with amount of refractive error, are basis of most of the ectasia scoring system. So I'll sail you through some clinical scenario in which I find difficulty in making my decision. So let's see that how I decided on patient's treatment on this. So yeah, before that, we'll discuss the definition of residual bed. So is there a magic number? There's no magic number. Residual bed should not be less than 50% of original thickness. Since the structural support for the cornea has been shown to reside in the anterior cornea. For example, if the pre-surgery pachymetry is 546 micron, then post-ablation residual bed should always be more than 273. Each surgeon must develop his own safety limit for residual bed, but this should not be less than 300. But literature says that this residual bed can be from 250 to 300 micron. Percentage tissue altered is how the preoperative corneal thickness combined with excimer laser ablation translates into postoperative corneal biomechanics. PTA matrix representing the percentage of anterior corneal tissue that is modified during refractive surgery. PTA takes into account the integrated relationship between preoperative corneal thickness, ablation depth, flap thickness, and final residual bed. It is calculated as flap thickness plus ablation depth, and it's divided by central corneal thickness. It should always be less than 40%. It's an independent indicator of postoperative corneal ectasia, and PTA more than 40% is a negative prognostic indicator. So this is first case scenario in which a 32-year-old woman present for LASIK consultation with hopes of being less dependent on glasses. She does not wear contact lenses. On external examination reveal excellent exposure with corneal diameter of 10 millimeter. Anterior segment evaluation is absolutely normal and fundus is absolutely normal. So the refractive screening of the patient is in front of you. She has moderately high myopia with best corrected visual acuity is better than 20/20. Pachymetry looks fine, above 500. So what are my challenges in this case? Relatively steep corneal curvature, small corneal diameter, thin pachymetry, large pupil. So I have a borderline shape, size, and the thickness of the cornea. But during the screening, we got that our residual bed is 326 micron in right eye and 333 micron in left eye, which is above 50% of central corneal thickness. So it is under the criteria. And the PTA is around 35.2 and 34.2, which is way less than 40%. So surgical option given to patient are keratorefractive procedure and the lens procedure. My reservation with microkeratome LASIK in this case is that flap diameter is dependent on corneal curvature and the diameter. The flap must be large enough to accommodate large treatment zone, yet not so large that it extends into the limbus. And the slight flap decentration, there's a significant risk of limbal invasion and hemorrhage. So the option given to patient were femto-LASIK or any flap surgery. So flap diameter is independent of corneal curvature and the diameter, and it can be preset. But again, the limitation is the centration, and the flap edges close to limbus cause limbal bleeding and AC air bubble in the small white to white and corneal diameter. Surface ablation, there's no flap related risk. A large zone with an added blend can be achieved. Excellent centration can be achieved without any difficulty. The limitations are regression in haze, phakic implants, of course, the cost, and then the intraocular complications are the issue. So the treatment plan, patient opt for the PRK with the ablation zone of 6.5 with blend. And we have RSB post PRK 434 micron in right eye and 439 micron in the left eye. The take-home message is recognize the special challenges posted by the patient with microcornea. Surface ablation remains an important keratorefractive option in selected cases. The femtosecond laser is safer than microkeratome in patient with small steep cornea because it offers more control over the flap diameter. The second case scenario, a 25-year-old woman, RGP user for 11 years, and she wanted to go for LASIK. We asked her not to wear contact lenses, but she wore her contact lenses. Rest of the examination looks normal. And when she came to us, this is a refractive screening, and I find a red flag here in topography, and she has moderately high myopia as well. So my challenges with this case, will there be adequate stromal tissue for laser ablation to correct this amount of myopia and astigmatism? With spherical equivalent of -10 and 9.5, a conventional laser procedure estimate to remove 120 to 120 and 114 micron to provide complete correction. RSB is 285 in right eye and 293 in left eye, but it is more than 50% of central corneal thickness. PTA is 44.6 and 43.3%, which is above 40%. And the corneal topography show inferior steepening along with somewhat high K readings and slightly thin pachymetry. So it's called for the critical evaluation for subclinical keratoconus. Is it a subclinical keratoconus or the contact lens warpage, since she is using contact lens for a long time? So we asked her to have a post-CL free period, and we repeated her topography in 3 weeks, and topography were absolutely normal. And this is her refractive screening post 3 weeks contact lens free period. So concern with keratorefractive procedures are borderline stromal thickness for laser vision correction, PTS more than 40% increase the risk of post of ectasia, and the future enhancement not possible without enough corneal stroma. So my treatment plan for this patient was phakic lens implant, and patient is doing good with 20/25 in right eye and 20/25 in the left eye as well. There's no night vision problems here. The take-home message, the differentiation of clinical keratoconus from contact lens induced corneal warpage is important for both accurate and surgical correction and safety. The phakic IOL implantation is a good option to discuss with patients who have any suggestion of subclinical keratoconus, and the phakic IOL produce equivalent or superior vision for patients with adequate borderline stromal thickness for laser vision connection. Third scenario is a 30-year-old Asian woman interested in refractive surgery, and she has a palpebral pressure which is very small, lids are somewhat tight, and the corneal diameter is 11 millimeter. And rest of the examination looks normal. Her refractive screening shows this, and this is her topography. So my challenges with this case, that relatively thin pachymetry, increased risk of night vision problem with high astigmatism. Pachymetry maps reveal the thinnest portion of the cornea to be displaced inferotemporal in right eye and slightly displaced in inferotemporal in the left eye as well. So let's see, this is a pachymetry, which is displacement. Examination in favor in this patients are both best corrected resolution is better than 20/20, stable refraction for 2 years, normal curvature elevation maps, normal Bellin embrasio enhanced ectasia screening, RSB is 353 in right eye, 343 in left eye, which is more than 50%. and PTA is 29.6 and 32.1%. Pachymetric curves follow the mean and substandard deviation curves. So conclusion is pachymetry findings alone are not sufficient for the surgeon to reject the patient as a candidate for refractive surgery. So the treatment plan, the patient opted for PRK, and the RSP is 458 in right eye and 457 in the left eye. And of course, the patient was discussed about the risk of haze and topical steroid. So thin pachymetry, tight lid, small palpebral fissure, small corneal diameter. PRK seems to be the better option than LASIK sometimes. And the post-op vision was 20 plus 20 and 20 plus 25. Right eye is plano and left eye is minus 0.5 with plus 0.5 at 145 degree. So take-home message is a careful analysis of corneal topography, power, elevation, and thickness is especially important in highly astigmatic patient to rule out sign of pre-existing ectasia. Highly astigmatic patient should be presented with realistic vision expectation and warned about possible night visual symptoms. Successful correction of high astigmatism has the potential to improve near as well as distance vision in young person. So the conclusion, I'm concluding my talk with the clinician must not rely solely on one measurement or data point in determining the patient's suitability for corneal surgery ectasia. Nevertheless, with improved screening protocol, enhanced understanding of corneal biomechanics, and judicious application of patient selection criteria, we can strive to reduce the incidence of postoperative ectasia as much as possible. Crucial is to understand, recognize, and accepting its risk factor, critical towards achieving a significant reduction in occurrence of this adverse event. Thank you very much for your patient listening.